There are a lot of issues in the modern video game industry. These issues are also, unfortunately, fairly complex and diverse as well. You have things like developer burnout because of working conditions, you have forced usage of proprietary software and engine infrastructure, which just tanks the quality and functionality of certain games, and of course, you also have the progressively worsening condition of mainstream monetization tactics. But today, I want to switch gears away from all of these topics, since I have hashed and rehashed them many a time, and focus on a more subtle problem that is much easier to remedy, but still greatly affects many different titles. Back in the day, and I sound old saying that, but I'm really not, it just feels like such a long time for some reason, but back in the day, there was an actual paid ecosystem of game testers who would beta test content in order to prep it for launch. Now, to some degree, that ecosystem certainly still exists, but it has now evolved and taken on a very different shape. I actually participated in some legitimate beta testing many years ago, and I don't mean just playing a public or private beta and offering feedback like, you should do this, or wouldn't it be cool if that. That's basically what most players do nowadays after betas with totally unreasonable bullshit ideas that are never going to happen. They just couldn't ever happen. But back then, the format was drastically different. Contrary to what many nowadays believe, true beta testing is not the practice of just giving people access to the full product and letting them play at their own pace for fun. Oh, no, no, no. Real beta testing is a documented, segmented format where there are detailed logs and players progress through specific areas and activities that are riddled with issues while outlining exactly what they encounter, then recreating any and every issue that they can and further logging that entire process. The idea is to iron out problems that would negatively impact the end user experience, and within the framework of that goal, there are quite a few different stages and keywords. There's alpha testing, which is much akin to beta testing, but even more rough, and then there is quality assurance. The bulk of these terms overlap in function and are also anything but glorious. I kid you not, a large chunk of what you do is jump up and down on different objects to make sure that you can't get stuck, or run into walls to make sure they are actually walls, or other extremely basic tasks that have no excitement and no thrill. The job is tedious, it pays like shit, but it is invaluable to the customer in terms of the sway it can hold over their final experience. In what now seems like a disappearing era of gaming, QA, alpha, and beta testing would occur behind closed doors. You would rarely hear much, if at all, except maybe about some third or fourth iteration on the beta, which would even then likely be closed off and low-key. A typical first user experience with a game came through a curated demo, which was designed to show the player how the final experience would unfold because it was actually the finished product. The problem now is that the once normal practice of QA and beta testing a game before public consumption is disappearing. There are a ton of different examples for this. Go scroll Steam and pick practically any early access title that just came out, and you will find a game that is being sold, often for its full price, and did not do an ounce of the required testing to iron out basic functionality. To be more specific, we can harken back to a game called Atlas. It came out of nowhere, promised insane things, streamers mobbed the directory on launch, and the servers crashed. The issues started in, and then a massive host of problems came to the service, from hacking to mechanical exploitation, and all the while the game was being sold for $30 when it was clear for a variety of different reasons it was simply an ARC DLC that had been stripped out and sold as its own title without being tested under the early access banner. It is a perfect example of players performing the role of quality testing and paying to do so, when in the past, the same type of testing would have been performed by paid staff or contractors. Now, some players will certainly argue that early access is a different area and a disconnected practice. I should not penalize development teams for offering early versions of the product in order to fund future development, and in a lot of ways they are correct, especially for certain indie games and developers. But the issue of inadequate testing is now bleeding over into the world of multi-million-dollar AAA games, or at least it has been for a while now. I might be late to the party. And when I say multi-million-dollar games, that's like the ultimate lowball. Some of these titles are in the 100 million plus range, and somehow still neglect the proper testing required to polish the product. Nowadays, we hear a lot about open betas or closed alphas, but even then, the alphas offer friend keys and turn the whole experience into a scramble to try and get in and play the game early. That's kind of the mentality there. What was once a paid position that operated behind closed doors has been turned inside out, and in many circumstances is dressed up and sold as an incentive to spike pre-orders. Some games go so far as to have a beta, with big air quotes there around the word beta, days before launch with no progress wipe, and wall off the entire offering behind their special editions. It's a perversion on what is in truth a critical phase in the development process, and in a situation where there is an absence of dedicated testers who actually perform the grunt work required to ensure a game's integrity, the end user customers become the testers. Where once a team of paid workers, though admittedly it's not very appealing work, would meticulously comb through the product like a water filter pulls out all the dirt, now the users paying full price for the product are the ones drinking, and the dirt's all still in there. This is, of course, not a 100% certainty. There is no rule book for quality or beta testing. It's not an enforced regulation or anything like that. It's different on a case-by-case basis, but looking at recent industry examples, it's becoming clear that the goalposts for what is acceptable and what is not are always moving. With a lot of titles being finished during frantic crunch time to meet arbitrary financial goals for an overarching publisher or controlling interest, the process of properly testing can be pushed back to the end users. And not only that, it can be dressed up and sold to those users. It's a no-brainer that bottom-line driven corporate entities would go for that. If the bulk of gamers treated the paid access betas and alphas like critical infrastructure tests, then the method might work without being overly detrimental, but they don't. The prevailing mentality is that these are ways to get into the game and have fun earlier. They are even sold and marketed that way at times. And as a result, you have players unknowingly doing a job that requires a certain work ethic and diligence without actually having that work ethic or diligence. And they can't honestly be expected to have it either, which then leads to games launching in a worse condition while subsequently taking longer to smooth out. There are actually a couple of different fixes for this. First is obviously adequate testing pre-release with the right team that prioritizes proper procedure in order to confirm the game's functionality. But even if we chalk that up as days past, there is another method that, while imperfect, still allows for higher quality releases, especially for subsequent post-launch patches. The method is a public test server, or PTS. Many games utilize a PTS in order to iron out the majority of issues before launching large patches and updates. It does not solve all problems, and it is still subject to some of the same issues as paid or public betas and alphas, but at the very least it puts a necessary testing barrier between the end user paid experience and the flawed tech demo versions. Various games that I have played in my lifetime utilized a PTS at some point or another, but prominent among them was the original Division game. The original Division struggled hard with basic functionality. You could fall through the floor, get locked out of your character, glitch through walls, etc., and that is the exact type of problem that testing should catch. Perhaps it was a function of time constraints, who knows, but anyways, the game continued to struggle with balancing right through many major patches until eventually they implemented a PTS in order to test balancing before implementation. The PTS was subject to some serious problems, and when I say it's an imperfect system, that goes doubly true for the Division, because the vast majority of players treated it like early access to the new material, and just tried to get a powerful character and grief each other, like they normally did in the main game anyways. It was kind of a shit show for a lot of the time. But even with a small subset of the population actually testing, and I mean really testing, the content seemed to improve by a significant margin because there was real feedback that was able to expose glaringly obvious flaws and balancing issues. The Division 2 does not currently have a PTS, but I quite passionately hope that they implement one because it would have a hugely positive impact on the game. That being said, the sequel is already operating under a far superior patch cycle and timeline, so it's in a better position outright from the get-go. But still, a PTS would go a long way when it comes to avoiding issues like, for instance, the new gear sets having blatantly broken stats and attributes, or conflicting mechanics that render them pretty much useless. On a PTS, those problems would be visible and replicated within hours, maybe even minutes. A game like Anthem admittedly had more problems than just testing, but imagine if an actual paid team of professionals had gone in and tested endgame gear and stat rolls and the whole shebang. It's true that time constraints are largely what crippled the game, but it was also acknowledged that there was no real testing done. And when a game launches straight to consumers untested, the result is that many gamers are suckered into paying full price in order to test a product that should already have been finished. They had the nerve to call what essentially amounted to an alpha a demo as well, because why not? Who cares about definitions, am I right? And EA even told BioWare to make the game unmemeable. Whoopsie, swing and a miss on that one. There are a host of different issues that contribute to dysfunctional game releases, but a powerful and relatively easy fix is broader implementation of public test servers, and a greater emphasis on diligent pre-release quality control, or as a sort of pseudo-fix, greater awareness promoted among gamers themselves that in a situation where developers are not able to allocate the resources to hire true beta testers, but that's a pretty big yikes already, For those that purchase the game and participate in their gimmicky pre-order boosting beta sessions, it would be helpful to try and replicate a couple more issues and bring them to everyone's attention. The bottom line is, many games are launching with increasingly poor levels of relative polish as a result of crunch time development and inadequate testing. They have perverted the proper testing infrastructure and repurposed it as a profit gimmick. So when buying games at launch, pre-ordering to gain access to some early offering, or looking at any early access title, be aware that the reality of the situation is that you are paying to test something that may not be in a deserving or finished state for quite some time. I guess my main point is, stop fucking selling us untested products for full price, or actually, in a lot of circumstances, more than full price. It's like selling a car with an untested radio. It might work, I guess, who knows? But it's like selling the car with the untested radio and then expecting the customer to figure out that the radio is broken, how it's broken, and then report it so that the car company can fix the radio. Bitch, no, I bought the car. It should work. There is an emphasis now on getting access earlier. A lot of players truly desire it. Give it to me now and give it to me perfect. But those two things are not possible simultaneously. It's unrealistic to expect that you can chop down on development time, but increase the quality and scope of content in a product or a game. At least not without massive budgets and talented leadership managing creative artists. The industry is pushing for faster access, but totally gutting the release quality as a result. If given a choice between having a game a couple months sooner and it being broken as shit, or having it later but it went through the proper iterative testing procedures, that's a no-brainer for me. Postpone, take the time, fix the game, and sell me something that is complete that I don't have to treat like a shitty job just to help finish it. Sadly, that is easier said than done. A lot of the deadlines the games are now adhering to have nothing to do with their own development process, but even so, talking about this is my contribution to try and have a positive impact on the industry's direction, at least maybe slightly, though it probably won't hardly do a thing. That's it though, enough for today. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. There are various different gaming communities, merch, and some other stuff too, but I'll cut it there and I'll stop rambling. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.